All right. Hi, everyone. Hello, and welcome to the 2021 State of Medical Device Virtual Summit. This session is on the FDA Digital Health Center of Excellence and the advancement of digital health technology. My name is Taylor Brown, and I'm a senior medical device guru here at Greenlight Guru, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. Before we dive into today's session, let me introduce our speaker, Matthew Diamond of FDA CDRH. Before we do that, I will touch on a few items really quick. This session is going to run about 40 minutes. It will include a Q&A session at the end. So please feel free to submit your questions as we go through. The slides will be made available to you, and this session will be recorded. So a bit about Matthew Diamond here with me today. Matthew Diamond, MD, PhD, is the Chief Medical Officer for Digital Health at FDA Center for Devices and Radiological Health. There he is the senior clinical expert and focal point of contact for digital health medical devices and related clinical issues. In his role at FDA, Dr. Diamond oversees digital health policy development and implementation for emerging technologies, including artificial intelligence and medical device software. Since March 2020, Dr. Diamond has been a leader on the CDRH's COVID-19 response team. We are so excited to have him here today. So without further ado, let me hand it over to our presenter, Dr. Matthew Diamond.
Thank you very much, Taylor, and it is a pleasure to be here. As Taylor mentioned, I'd like to share a little bit about a very exciting new development at CDRH, our Center of Excellence in Digital Health. I'd like to talk a little bit broadly about digital health and the landscape of products that we are considering, and then focus a little more deeply on one particular area. As Taylor mentioned, it's been one of my focus areas and an area that I know stakeholders on this call are very interested in. It's artificial intelligence and machine learning based software. If you could go on to the next slide, please. So we'll start with the perfect. And let me just adjust my screen there. Perfect. So digital health can be defined a number of ways. We think about it as very broadly as the convergence of connectivity, data, computing power for healthcare and related uses. And we think about that across the full lifespan of a patient and those who are not patients, just living a healthy lifestyle. The medical devices are a subset. Digital health medical devices are a subset of digital health products more broadly. And you can see depicted in this figure, starting on the left with healthy living and prevention, into the center of the diagram here with diagnosis and treatment that we normally associate with medical devices. And important to note on the right that in the context of rehabilitation, recovery, home care, these products, and specifically medical devices, play an important role. And with the continued advancement of sensor technology, energy, efficiency, miniaturization of devices, these products will continue to play an increasingly important role. And we see now, in the context of the public health emergency with COVID-19, the crucial role that is played by our ability to collect data remotely when either patients can't come into the hospital or it's just safer for them to be at home and to collect data and to communicate with their providers from a safe and comfortable home environment. Next slide. And what we'll see here is that not only do these devices, can they be used as medical products, and we're very interested in how they're used to develop medical products, to monitor the functioning of medical products. And that includes broadly not just medical devices, but biologics and drugs, for which digital health technologies play an important role. They can be used together with a drug or incorporated into a pill, as many of you may have seen. Next slide. So why a digital health center of excellence? For the last decade, the Center for Devices and Radiological Health we have been developing policy in digital health. We've been collaborating both within the center and across the agency. Essentially, this is part of the planned evolution of our digital health program. We're looking to help to modernize the agency and prepare FDA for what we see as a future dominated by these products. We recognize it's important to protect patients, to maintain our FDA standards as these new technologies take an increasingly important role. Next slide. So tell you a little bit about what we are doing now and what we've planned for the Digital Health Center of Excellence. Essentially, our job is to empower digital health stakeholders, and we do that in a number of ways. And we do that, again, both with working with folks within the agency and collaborating with stakeholders such as yourselves. Our goal is to promote innovation, to help make connections, build partnerships, and then share the expertise that we have at the center and learn from the expertise that is outside of the center and the agency. Next slide. I can talk briefly about some of the outcomes that we will achieve through this new focused effort, new resources that are captured in the Center of Excellence. Essentially, we've been working to build new regulatory paradigms. I'll talk to you in a minute about the need for and our initial work in a tailored approach to artificial intelligence-based medical software. One of our key missions is to recognize the need for new regulatory paradigms and help to pilot and build tailored programs for particular areas. We want stakeholders inside and outside of the center and agency to have efficient access, as I mentioned, to the knowledge and other resources they need to accelerate the digitalization of their programs and the incorporation of digital health technologies, across multiple areas. I mean, we see digital health as as cutting across, every medical discipline and every area of interest to the agency. And it's important that when you have these multiple different stakeholders, that there's consistency in applying digital health technologies and the policies. And it's our role to bring together many of these stakeholders so that, for example, in the neurology division and in the cardiology division and the orthopedic division, there is a similar and aligned uniform approach to bringing in a new technology to bear. Next slide. So I'll touch on a little bit of the specific roles external to the FDA, FDA Wide, and then what we're doing in CDRH specifically. Next slide. And this center is based at the Center for Devices and Radiological Health. And I'll start there. And at CDRH, we essentially are leading the efforts to promote best practices. As I mentioned, uniform implementation of digital health policy. And we recognize that the number of submissions to market digital health products is growing exponentially as more and more types of products incorporate some aspect of either remote data collection, sensing, communication, or smart analytics. In CDRH, we are leading the charge for the use of these technologies. Next slide. FDA Wide, we provide scientific expertise across the agency. If a sponsor is proposing to use a digital health technology, let's say in a clinical trial, for a drug, it's important that they engage directly with the review division at the agency. In this case, it would be CDR, the drug center, for their medical product. But there's a role for CDRH to play in providing expertise about these devices to support all of those efforts. A lot of facilitation. We share and collaborate regulatory science research focused in digital health. We collaborate with other centers, including the Drug Center and the Biologics Center, to write guidances related to these products. And we offer training for staff across the agency. Next slide. And then a large part of what the center is about is outreach and collaboration with external partners, such as many of you here today. We are participants on international standards related to digital health. We try our best to communicate the policies that we've issued, and all of these policies are in response to feedback and input from the public. So as much direct engagement as we can get. I welcome your questions today. You can always reach out to us by email. We have really an open door for conversations. We recognize that digital health is a rapidly evolving field, and it's important to be as interactive as possible. Next slide. Here is just at a very high level a roadmap. You can see starting on the lower left, we're essentially in phase one. We announced the Center of Excellence in September of this year. We provided a number of listening sessions to have a conversation with the community more broadly. And moving into 2020, we will be actively building the coordinative structures both for within the agency and work outside of the agency. So we're really, if there's one message to put out today, is that we're here, we're open for business, and we're interested in your input. We'd like to know how we can be most useful to the community to promote the responsible use of digital health technologies. Next slide. And this one may not have come through. There's a list of current focus areas, and we'll go straight to this one focus area that I'm going to talk in a little bit more detail about today. This is a document we put out last year on a proposed framework for modifications to artificial intelligence and machine learning based software as a medical device. This is an example of the type of work that will be accelerated by the Center of Excellence. And in fact, we have put out on our list of guidances that we intend to publish next year, a guidance on artificial intelligence-based software that continues the work of this paper. We received hundreds of comments and lots of input, probably from folks listening in on this call, and I wanted to thank you for that input. And we're using that to write our guidance that, again, we will issue next year. Next slide. One of the reasons why we feel that there needs to be a tailored approach for specifically artificial intelligence and machine learning based software is related to what we're seeing as a trend, as we've spoken about a little bit earlier, moving from, on the left, what's depicted as a traditional device world, hardware based, to a digital health device world on the right. So product development timeline moving from years to weeks to months. an environment where there's limited post-market data available for hardware to one where there's a potential for a high availability of data. And as I mentioned, moving from a relatively stable number of submissions to exponential growth in submissions, largely seen in software, especially in artificial intelligence-based products, often due to the lower barrier of entry that I expect this community has seen for developing a software product as opposed to more traditional hardware-based manufacturing. Next slide. So let me give some concrete examples of some software that we have authorized for marketing in the United States that fall into this category of artificial intelligence-based software as a medical device, or SAMD. And these devices typically will either assist a healthcare provider to do their job, or as in the case of the first product up here on the top of the slide, actually autonomously perform an evaluation of a patient and recommend a next step. So I'll start with that one. This is the IDXDR product that we authorized actually now a little over 2 years ago. It detects certain types of diabetic retinopathy in a primary care setting where these patients would not otherwise be able to have that evaluation. And for those patients with certain types of diabetic retinopathy, they are referred to a specialist for appropriate care. On the bottom, as an example, this is a Caption Health product that we authorized just this year, and it actually assists a non-expert healthcare professional in the acquisition of echocardiographic images. Another example of how, whether it's in the context of scarce resources, limited expertise, or a pandemic that makes it difficult for patients to travel to locations where they can get specific assistance, this device allows a broader population of healthcare providers to basically acquire these specialized images so that these patients can get the care that they need. Next slide. So we are excited about the opportunities for artificial intelligence-based devices. It's a major area of focus for the Center of Excellence. One of the strengths of these products is their ability to learn from real-world data and improve their performance over time. We see this, as I mentioned, across all medical fields and across many different applications, whether that's diagnosis, treatment, and even new insights into physiology. Next slide. In addition to these opportunities, we do recognize the challenges, and our program has specific aims to address many of these challenges. We recognize that, like any medical product, artificial intelligence-based software can have a bias. They're based on data sets. Sometimes the data sets have bias, and it's important to identify and address those biases. Also, some of these products are more opaque in their functioning than many of the other devices that we oversee at the center. And the explainability of these approaches these are important scientific questions that the field is working to actively address. And then, probably the greatest challenge and the largest hurdle for these development of these products is the need for really good data, high quality, sufficiently sized, and well curated data sets. We are working with partners to help them address some of these challenges. Next slide. So I mentioned now a number of times that one of our roles is to reimagine a new regulatory framework, and one that is tailored for the unique considerations of digital health technologies, software in particular, and especially now I'm talking about artificial intelligence-based software. We want to enable manufacturers to make relatively rapid improvements to their software while maintaining reasonable assurance of safety and effectiveness. We want to be least burdensome on developers and enhance patient access to these high quality products. Next slide. And I would also like to mention that we see a spectrum of artificial intelligence and machine learning based products. I'm not going to talk too much about algorithms today, but what this slide is depicting is that, as shown on the left, the locked algorithm with discrete updates is the type of machine learning based system whose products we have given marketing authorization to up until now. Essentially, the algorithms are trained using machine learning systems, but they do not actively adapt autonomously. Move to the right of the spectrum, what you could call continuously adaptive algorithms, where you have more frequent updates and the potential for these updates to be performed by the computer itself. So we see a world here where we're moving from left to right, even within machine learning based systems, and we're looking for a regulatory approach that will apply across the spectrum, again, initially to what we've seen come into the agency and have approved or cleared on the left, but knowing that some of the more exciting opportunities involve continuously adaptive systems. Next slide. I'm showing here when it appears a figure from the discussion paper that depicts an AI/ML workflow, and I'll walk you through this quickly, and then we'll superimpose how we are thinking about a regulatory oversight over these products. But you can see that within the shaded area in the center of the slide is the development environment. And this is where data are selected, managed, used to train a system, where that model is validated. And then the two arrows pointing down, green and white, toward the bottom of the slide represent the deployment of the model into the real world, where new data is inputted into the system, and then the output of that model is monitored, and that data are used. Those data are used to retrain the system. So we can go to the next slide, where we'll see what we proposed in the paper. And apologies here, it seems like in the PowerPoint conversion, some of these boxes are turned to the side, but you'll get the idea. I'm going to go through this 1, 2, 3, 4 points of oversight. We'll go through them together. Number one is a culture of quality and organizational excellence, and this is what we described in the paper as good machine learning practices. So we feel that if a developer is essentially adhering to these practices, it gives us a lot of confidence as reviewers. It can help to build the public trust. It can help to streamline the review, and it's essentially building quality into their products. What you see depicted as number 2 and 3 toward the bottom of the slide, this is our pre-market review of the product. Essentially, what you would think of traditionally as a company or a developer sending in an application to the agency to be cleared or approved. And number 2 is the process we have in place today. What you see as number 3 is, for these AI/ML-based products, the option to submit a predetermined plan for the evolution of the product, for that adaptation, those modifications, largely based on retraining from new data. And what we described is, we've asked companies to proactively tell us what are the changes that they would like to make, and we call that the SPS, or the set of pre-specifications. And then how are they going to go about and make those changes and keep the product safe and effective. And we're calling that right now the ACP, or the Algorithm Change Protocol. And this allows the company to come to us with a plan and say, this is what we would like to do, not only for the product that we can demonstrate the validation that we've already done, but our intention for the evolution of the product and the guardrails that we're putting in place on that product. And then number 4 is the real-world performance monitoring that is part of a total product lifecycle approach, and is particularly important for products, as you can imagine, that evolve over time. Just a little more information here about those good machine learning practices. Essentially, we liken them to what are accepted engineering practices in development. Good quality system, software reliability, data analysis. There are a number of both best practice groups, standards organizations that we participate in, and we are trying our best to encourage the harmonization of these efforts so that there is a clear set of practices that both sponsors, in other words, developers, can point to, and that we can point to as well. Next slide. And what is depicted here is just a little more information, as I mentioned, about what does it mean to make a predetermined change control plan. And we are writing about this, describing it in a lot more detail to put out in a draft guidance, as I mentioned, for next year, to help guide companies and reviewers at the agency what to put in and what to look for in a proactive plan on evolving AI/ML-based software. Next slide. And I'm using this image here. This is taken from the International Medical Device Regulators Forum on continuous learning for software as a medical device. We'll walk through one cycle of this. And I think it's a really good summary of what we're trying to facilitate, enable, support through a tailored regulatory framework. And what you see starting on the upper left around 10 or 11 o'clock, what's called a SAMD definition statement, which is very similar to what you would think a statement of the intended use of the product would be. Should it be used? How should it be used? How does it function? And moving clockwise around the circle, as that product is deployed into the real world, it's important to collect data on how it's doing, so that with the analysis of that data, the hope is that new clinical evidence can be generated that can lead to new functionality of the product. And then there's a new definition statement, and I'll give you an example. It could be a piece of medical software that is analyzing a medical image, like a CAT scan. The first iteration of the software, the product may just be able to triage scans to highlight for radiologists who may have a stack of, dozens of head CT scans. Can you please look at this one? We think there's a bleed in there. It's a triage function. As that product improves its performance and demonstrates its value in the real world, the developer, I could imagine, could provide greater functionality to exactly delineate what the problem is, characterize the lesion, and potentially make a diagnosis, send a request for next steps in the treatment of the patient. These are functionalities that have a greater impact and can have a greater clinical impact. And we would like to enable this type of evolution of software products. So I'm going to pause there. I'd like to take some questions, and interested in your feedback either today or I think I have my contact info on the next slide. Feel free to email me, and really, we're very interested in your input.
Thank you so much, Dr. Diamond. Very, very timely presentation with everything going on at the CDRH. One of the questions that came through was actually just some tips and tricks on how to communicate with your team and how to get involved with all the exciting initiatives at the CDRH. Are there any suggestions that you have for the attendees?
Yeah. So we have, a digital health email address that is listed here on the slide, and my email address is as well. We welcome outreach with ideas, with a request for a conversation. I know there are some folks listening who probably have a product. Maybe it's an app that they're developing. First of all, they may want to know, what is the regulatory status of my app, or of this type of app? And this is a question that you can actually email to the digital health email box. Now, there is a formal process at the FDA for device determination. This might take a number of months. The email to digital health will hopefully be answered in about a week. And our goal is to point you in the right direction to say, hey, have you seen this guidance document that we put out? And actually, examples 3, 5, and 7 are very similar to the product that you're developing. And you can see that we say that, one of these functions, and we do take a function-based approach to medical device software at the agency. This function seems very similar to the one in the guidance, which is recognized as being a medical device function, but this other function actually is not a medical device function, because not everything involved in healthcare actually is what we think of as meeting the definition of device, and therefore actively regulated by FDA. And if you are at the point where you're already working with or ready to submit, working with the agency or ready to submit a marketing application, you can always request the involvement of the digital health team. So if it's a cardiovascular product, it will get directed to the cardiovascular review division, or one of the review divisions. But we come in as a digital health center as consultants to help support the process. And especially if there are digital health aspects that may be particularly novel or unique, we can play an important role in helping the review division, because again, we see products across the full spectrum of the center and can bring that experience to the conversation.
Yep. From all the presentations I've listened to at the FDA, I've learned that it never hurts to ask the question. So always reach out, and I'm sure they'll get a lot of great information back. Something that comes up with companies that I work with is just the idea of validation. So what are some tips and tricks, expectations maybe from the FDA regarding software validation, regarding repeatability specifically?
Yeah, it's a good question. And, it does go back to the last question, which is, and I know you said, come often to the agency, and I would say come often, come early, because if you can get input from the review division that will be making a decision on your file about what they will be looking for the validation of your particular product, then, I think that's really invaluable. We often, people use the word validation in different ways, and we can talk about analytic validation and clinical validation. We can think about validation as really an umbrella that incorporates everything you do for your software, that makes sure that it does essentially what it's supposed to do to fulfill its intended purpose. I know that's kind of a general answer. There are a number of guidances, and I can, send some links to the group afterwards, if that's helpful, that talk about testing. But, testing is just one aspect. And we really do like to see a holistic approach that includes, risk considerations, and it helps us when we're looking at a file to appreciate the traceability from, the requirements of the software to the tests that were done, and et cetera.
Right. Yep. I wrote this one down as one of my questions too, but you mentioned something about wanting good data, well curated data, which is nothing new for the medical device. But any guidance on, you're working with partners now to address challenges you mentioned. What are some of the trends in data analysis, and what are some of the um, you know, aspects of good data that you mentioned?
Yeah, it's a good question. And, we've heard a number of suggestions, can some folks have asked, can FDA have sequestered databases in a number of different areas that are used in a standardized way to test products consistently? Can other third parties like academic medical societies develop, and as they are, currently, um, what is their role to play? And we're really excited to see these efforts because we do feel that some of these groups of societies of professionals in certain areas, are well equipped to address the particular needs of their community. Because what you need to see in a data set in one area is not going to be the same as you might need for another application, and it can get quite specialized. What's important for us is in a marketing application, just to be very clear about what are the data that are being used, what are the characteristics of the data, why these data were chosen, how the data are being separated out for development, what's being used for training, tuning, testing. But we recognize that more standardized, high-quality data sets would really help move the field forward in general.
Understood. And last question, since I have you in the hot seat and people are asking me about this too. Any updates on the pre-cert pilot?
I don't have any updates right now. Appreciate the question. We did put out an update a few months ago, and I don't know if you had seen that. And it continues to be a pilot under development. We're working with our stakeholders, and it's again part of the broader question about how can we design a regulatory framework that helps really helps make a scalable and effective review of software.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think that's a good note to end on. Dr. Matthew Diamond, thank you so much for your time and your presentation today. Uh, as I mentioned when we first got started, webinar was recorded, handouts will be made available. The mission of Greenlight Guru is to improve the quality of life. So anything we can do as an organization that helps you bring safer, life-changing devices to market quicker, such as holding this virtual summit, such as holding this presentation, it really aligns with that mission. So if you have any questions about Greenlight Guru, feel free to visit www.greenlight.guru. We have a short recess before our next presentation, so take a little break and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Taylor.